My son was buried 35 years ago, but last night a hospital called at 4 a.m. and said shocking news. Sunday afternoons used to mean something, but not anymore. Now they were performances, polished smiles, hollow prayers, and cruelty served warm beside the mashed potatoes. Greg sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his smile tighter than his tie. He always spoke like a man who believed God himself took notes when he opened his mouth. I sat quietly at the far end, my fork untouched, the air thick with the kind of silence that knows what's coming. "Layla," Greg began, voice smooth as syrup but twice as heavy. "The church board met this week. We all agreed it's time to do something noble with that old ranch. Sell the land, donate the proceeds to the ministry. You'd be honoring Henry's memory and showing humility before God." I said nothing, only folded my napkin. My granddaughter Eden, sitting beside him, crossed her legs and smirked at me. "Grandma, that property is just sitting there. It's been years since you even set foot on it. Dad's right, it could finally do some good. You don't want to cling to ghosts forever, do you?" Ghosts. That was what they called memory now. "It's not the land that's haunted," I said softly. "It's the people who built over it." Greg's smile thinned. "Let's not play the martyr, Layla. That place has been a burden on everyone since your son ruined this family. If you'd stopped spoiling that junkie boy, maybe you'd still have a husband, a house, and a name worth keeping." The words hit like stones. I felt them, but I didn't flinch. Eden's eyes dropped to her plate for half a heartbeat before she added, almost lazily, "He died 35 years ago, Grandma. Maybe it's time you buried your guilt with him." I stared at the tablecloth, the same one I had embroidered 50 years ago, tiny blue daisies along the edge. They had survived every storm this family caused, though they were never thanked for it. "Funny thing about the dead," I said at last, my voice quiet but steady. "They don't always stay buried." Greg chuckled, low and cruel, the kind of sound men make when they think they've already won. "God forgives sinners, Layla," he said, pushing his chair back, "but he doesn't reward fools." I watched him gather his papers, the donation forms he had printed, neat and legal looking. "Sign these, and you'll finally be free of that place," he added. "You'll thank me one day. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening." Eden stood, brushing imaginary crumbs off her skirt. "I'll bring the pen, Grandma," she said, her voice sugar-coated with impatience. "You can make it official after lunch." They left the dining room, laughing about their weekend plans, leaving the echo of their voices to scrape against the walls. I stayed seated, staring at the empty plates. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, the surface trembling faintly as if the house itself were holding its breath. I looked toward the mantel, where the only photograph left of my boy still hung Eddie at 19, sunlight on his face, the same grin that once filled the world with noise and joy. My fingers brushed the edge of the frame. "They buried you once, my boy," I whispered. "But maybe the Lord kept your truth alive." The air felt different after I said it, lighter somehow, as though the house had heard me and agreed. I rose slowly, my knees aching but my mind sharp, and I thought, let them mock, let them plan. Some truths have a way of rising, even through 35 years of dirt. 35 years ago, before my hands began to tremble, and before the town forgot how to say my name without whispering, I still believed truth always found its way to the light. That was before the fire, before Henry chose reputation over blood, and before Greg learned that lies, told often enough, start to sound like hymns. Eddie was 20 then. Too kind for his own good, too honest to survive men like them. He worked from dawn till dusk in the family stables, sweat on his neck, always humming while he brushed the horses. He loved that land more than anyone. It was his father's before Henry married me, and after his father passed, that boy made it his duty to keep the place alive. Henry said he admired that, but he admired nothing that wasn't profitable. Greg had just joined the family, freshly married to my daughter, sharp suit, easy smile, and eyes that looked at people the way bankers look at debt. I should have seen it then, the way they whispered behind the barn, the way the ledgers didn't add up, but love makes fools of mothers. One night I found Eddie sitting on the porch, jaw tight, hands shaking. "Ma," he said, "they're using the ranch. Not for feed, not for horses. They're moving things, crates of pills and chemicals from the east barn. I saw Greg counting cash. I think Henry's in on it." My stomach turned to stone. "You go to the sheriff," I said, but he shook his head. "They'll bury it, Ma. You know they will. But I can't just stand by." He left that night to confront them. I should have stopped him. I should have followed. Instead, I stayed by the window, watching headlights fade into the trees, praying it was only talk. By midnight the phone rang. The sheriff's voice was calm, practiced. "Mrs. Kane, I'm sorry. There's been an accident. Your son's truck went off the road near the lake. The fire well. There's not much left." I remember the sound that came out of me. It wasn't a scream. It was smaller, quieter, like air escaping a grave. They said the body was too burned to confirm identity, but there was a ring Eddie's and a wallet half melted in the glove compartment. Henry told the police Eddie had been struggling, that he'd fallen in with bad people, maybe overdosed. "Poor boy was lost," he said, his eyes dry. Greg nodded solemnly beside him, hand on Henry's shoulder like a dutiful son. I stood there, hands clenched, and said it was a lie. They looked at me like I had slapped a preacher. The sheriff patted my arm. "I know this is hard, ma'am, but we've got the evidence." The boy was troubled. Troubled. That word clung to him like soot. I went to the police station every day for a week. I demanded they test the remains, demanded they check the barn, the ledgers, the crates. They smiled, nodded, and filed my complaints under grief delusion. 2 weeks later, Henry stood on the courthouse steps beside Greg, reporters snapping photos. "My wife's lies killed my boy," he said to the cameras. "She can't accept that her son was an addict. God rest his soul." The newspaper printed it on the front page. "Local teacher blames family after son's tragic overdose." That was all it took. The church turned cold. Friends crossed the street when they saw me coming. Even my daughter stopped calling. Greg took over the ranch, selling the cattle, fixing the barns, and giving money to the church. They called him a man of faith, the redeemer of the Kane legacy. I called him what he was, a thief with a Bible in his hand. I lost everything, my husband, my name, my home. But worst of all, I lost the right to mourn. Every year they'd remind me of my sin, whispering that maybe I'd driven Eddie to it. I learned to keep quiet. I taught school until they stopped hiring me, then I retired early, alone. Some nights I'd still drive to the lake, sit by the water, and talk to the dark. "You didn't run off the road, did you, boy?" I'd whisper. The wind never answered, but sometimes it shifted, just enough to make the trees bend like they were bowing to something unseen. I kept one thing from that night, Eddie's silver cross. They found it near the lake, the chain snapped clean. I fixed it with fishing wire. Everyone said I was crazy for keeping it, but I always believed things break when they're trying to tell the truth. They called it denial, I called it waiting. And now, after all these years, I think maybe I wasn't the only one. The phone rang at 4:11 inches the morning, the kind of sound that cuts through dreams like a knife. I'd been awake anyway, sitting in the dark kitchen with my hands around a cup of cold tea, listening to the rain beat against the window. After 82 years, sleep doesn't come easy, especially when ghosts have louder voices than rest. I reached for the receiver, my fingers stiff from age and fear. "Hello?" Silence first, then a voice, calm but hurried. "Mrs. Kane? This is Mercy General Hospital in Tulsa. We have a patient here who listed you as his emergency contact. His name is Edward Kane." The world tilted. I gripped the counter. "You must have the wrong number," I said quietly. "My son died in 1989. The nurse paused. "Ma'am, he told me you'd understand when I mentioned the silver cross. The one fixed with fishing wire." My throat closed. The cross, that tiny broken thing I had mended with trembling hands, hidden from everyone. No one knew but him. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Please, what did you say his name was?" "Edward Kane," she repeated, gently now. "He was admitted late last night. He's stable, but weak. He asked for you." I couldn't speak. The phone slipped from my hand, dangling by the cord as the rain outside grew heavier. For 35 years, I had buried hope in the same grave as my boy. Now, that grave had split open. I pressed the phone to my chest, trembling, afraid to breathe. Could it be a mistake? A cruel prank? Or something worse, a dream that would break me when I woke? I steadied my voice. "I'll come," I said. Tell him I'm on my way." I didn't change clothes. I grabbed my keys, my old purse, and the silver cross from the drawer. I kissed it once, out of habit, and stepped into the storm. The road stretched black and endless, slick with rain. Headlights sliced through the dark, illuminating pieces of the past I thought I'd buried. The night of the fire, Henry's lie to the police, Greg's calm eyes when he called Eddie a junkie. I drove faster. Windshield wipers thrashed like they were fighting the truth. "Hope is the cruelest ghost," I whispered. "It comes back when you've just learned to live without it." Every mile closer, the ache in my chest deepened. I thought of the nights I prayed for this, on birthdays, on Christmas, on quiet Tuesdays, when the loneliness grew too big to swallow. I thought of how I'd finally stopped lighting a candle for him 5 years ago, telling myself that grief had to end somewhere. And now, here it was again, knocking on my door at 4 in the morning, demanding to be believed. I crossed into Tulsa just before dawn. The rain had turned to mist, the world washed gray. The hospital stood at the edge of the city, a block of concrete and light, humming like a heart that never stopped beating. I parked crooked, didn't care. My knees almost gave out as I walked through the sliding doors. The receptionist looked up, startled by the sight of an old woman dripping rainwater onto the white tile. "I'm here for Edward Kane," I said. My voice sounded foreign to me. She typed something, then nodded toward the elevators. "3rd floor, room 203. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. I watched my reflection in the metal doors, a face I barely recognized. The lines, the gray hair, the eyes clouded not just by age but by years of silence. What would he see when he looked at me? Would he even remember? Or would I find a stranger who carried my son's name but none of his soul? When the doors opened, I stepped into the dim hallway. Nurses whispered, machines beeped, footsteps echoed. The world felt smaller, slower, like it was holding its breath. I stopped at room 312. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. If it was him, I didn't know what I'd say. If it wasn't, I didn't know how I'd survive it. I prayed then not for miracles, but for mercy. "Lord, if he's alive, let me see his face. If he's not, let me see the truth, even if it breaks me." I turned the handle. The door creaked open, light spilling across the floor like dawn. And for the first time in 35 years, I stepped forward, not toward grief, not toward memory, but toward whatever waited on the other side of the lie they buried. The hallway outside room 203 smelled like disinfectant and rain. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle, afraid that touching it might make the dream vanish. I pushed it open slowly, the light spilling in like something sacred. He was there. Thin, pale, a face carved by time and punishment, hair silvered at the edges, but those eyes were my Eddie. The same gray-blue with flecks of green, the same defiant gentleness that no cruelty could bleach out. He looked up from his bed, confusion melting into disbelief, then trembling joy. "You came back, Ma." His voice was rough, gravel pulled through years of silence. I took one step, then another, and when I finally reached him, the only words that left my mouth were, I don't remember which of us reached first, only that the distance between us collapsed. 35 years of grief folded into that one embrace. I felt his ribs through the hospital gown, his heartbeat small but steady against my chest. For a long time, we didn't speak. We just held on, as if letting go might return us both to the dark we had come from. When he finally pulled back, he smiled, a small, broken thing. "You look just like I remembered, Ma," he whispered. "Older, sure, but still fierce." I touched his cheek. "And you," I said softly, "still stubborn enough to come back from the dead." He laughed once, then winced, pressing a hand to his side. "They said the same thing when I showed up at the bureau. Guess that makes me the ghost who talks too much." I frowned. "Eddie, what happened?" His eyes darkened, the humor fading. "You were right, Ma, about everything." He looked down at his hands, the skin scarred and pale. "The night of the fire I confronted Greg and Henry, told them I'd seen the ledgers, the shipments, everything. Henry panicked. Greg didn't. He said it'd be my word against theirs. Then Henry hit me. I woke up in the back of a truck, cuffed, blood in my mouth, my name already gone." "Gone?" I whispered. "They switched my ID. Said I was Alan Price, a hired hand, running stolen oxy through the ranch. Sheriff was on the payroll, Ma. Signed the papers himself. I screamed my name for weeks, but nobody cared. They shipped me to a private prison down in Texas. 20 years for a crime Greg committed. My vision blurred. And Henry?" He sighed. "Dead 10 years now. Heart failure. Never saw a cell. Greg made sure the record stayed buried. He collected the insurance payout under your name, bought Miles' realty, and laundered the drug money through the church. Every donation came from someone's pain." My stomach turned. "I tried to tell them," I said, voice trembling. "I told everyone what they'd done." Eddie's gaze softened. "I know, Ma. They made you the crazy widow because it was easier than believing the town's golden boy was a criminal." He reached into the drawer beside his bed and pulled out a folder, thick and worn. The FBI seal on the corner gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. When the government started investigating private prisons, they found my file. Turns out a whistleblower flagged my name. Took 5 years to untangle everything, but they cleared me. He handed me the folder. Inside were pages of financial reports, photocopies of bank statements, and a list of names all circling back to Greg Miles. "He's still at it," Eddie said quietly. "Still using God as a front. But now we've got proof. I kept it safe for months, waiting until I was strong enough to find you." Hen, I remembered the cross. He lifted it from around his neck. The same silver cross I'd fixed all those years ago, the fishing wire dull but unbroken. "It kept me alive," he said. "Every time I thought I couldn't take another day, I'd feel the wire and remember your hands." I pressed my palm over his, feeling the metal's warmth. "They called you a disgrace," I whispered. He smiled, faint but fierce. "Then let's make disgrace louder than their lies." I stared at him, my boy, grown into a man who had survived hell and come back carrying the truth. "Eddie," I said slowly, "this time, we won't whisper." He nodded, his eyes burning with something that looked like faith but sharper. "I didn't crawl out of that grave just to forgive them," he said. "I came back to finish what they started." I sat beside him, holding his hand as thunder rumbled in the distance. The rain outside had stopped, but the air still hummed, like the world itself was waiting. 35 years ago, they'd buried him under lies. Now, sitting in that sterile room, I realized the storm wasn't over, it was only just beginning. News travels fast in towns that thrive on gossip. By the next morning, word had reached the church office that a man named Edward Kane had checked into Mercy General, alive and asking for his mother. Greg always said faith was the only currency that never lost value, but when he found out Eddie was alive, even his faith cracked like glass. I wasn't there when he learned it, Eden told me later, but I could imagine it easily. Him standing in his office under the stained glass light of St. Augustine's church. Phone pressed to his ear, voice dropping to a whisper as his empire began to tremble. He'd built that life on a grave, and now the man buried in it was breathing again. He tried to stay calm, tried to sound godly, even while fear bled through his words. "The hospital will need to move him," he told someone on the phone. "Insurance issue. Mercy General isn't equipped for long-term care." But what he meant was simpler. Get Eddie away from anyone who might listen. Get him out of sight, again. Eden was the one who saw the transfer papers first. She'd just come off a double shift when the clerk slid the folder across the counter for her signature. "Routine transfer," he said, half asleep. The form was standard insurance authorization, transfer to another facility 2 counties over. But when she reached the patient name, her pen stopped. Edward Kane. She stared at it. The name sat there like a riddle her childhood had been built to forget. She thought of the stories she'd heard growing up, the junkie uncle her father swore had disgraced the family, the grandmother who lied to destroy good men. But buried somewhere beneath those lessons was another memory, faint but alive. Her small hands gripping the edge of a treehouse, a boy's laughter below her, her grandmother's voice telling her to hold tight. "That's Eddie's treehouse, sweetheart. Your uncle built it when he was just a kid." Eden's chest tightened. She left the nurse's station without finishing the form and drove straight to my house. When I opened the door, she looked like she'd seen a ghost, and maybe she had. "You knew," she said. Her voice shook with something between anger and disbelief. "You knew he was alive?" I motioned for her to sit, but she didn't. She stood there, clutching the papers to her chest. "You kept this secret?" "I didn't keep it," I said softly. "I waited until you could see who you were first." She blinked. "Who I was?" "You were raised in a house built on lies," I said. "I didn't want to give you the truth as just another weapon." For the first time, she didn't look like Greg's daughter. She looked like the child who once climbed trees barefoot and asked too many questions. "He said Eddie was an addict," she whispered. "He said you ruined everything." I met her eyes. "Your father ruined everything when he forgot. God could see through walls." She flinched at that, and I saw the battle in her, the girl taught to worship her father's image, and the woman now forced to face the rot beneath it. She didn't stay long. She left without another word, the papers trembling in her hands. That night, while Greg prepared his sermon about forgiveness, Eden returned to the hospital. The corridors were quiet, the kind of silence that hums when secrets are about to change shape. She slipped into the records room, logged into the database, and began searching. She didn't even know what she was looking for, only that if her father wanted a man dead, there had to be proof of why. At first, there was nothing. Then she saw it, a scanned document from 1989, filed under Miles Realty Insurance. Claimant, Gregory Miles. Beneficiary, self. Policy, accidental death benefit, Edward Kane. Signature, identical to the one on the transfer papers she'd been asked to sign. She stared at it for a long time, the pieces clicking together. The insurance money that built her father's company, the sermons about redemption, the donations to the church, all of it bought with the death certificate of a man who had never died. Her hands shook as she printed the file, tucked it into her coat, and left through the back door. The night air felt heavy, like even the moon wanted to look away. She didn't drive home. Instead, she parked outside the federal office downtown, walked straight to the security desk, and said the words that would undo her family. "I have evidence of insurance fraud and criminal conspiracy. It involves a man named Gregory Miles." When she got back in her car, she cried quietly, the way people do when they finally stop pretending. In the morning, she went to work like nothing had happened. Greg called her during his lunch hour, cheerful as ever. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "We'll finalize the sale of the ranch after the Sunday service." "Sure, Dad," she said softly. "Big day." But that night, she came to see me again. She didn't speak. She just placed a folded copy of the insurance file on my kitchen table. I touched her hand and said, "You did right, Eden. Sometimes God's work isn't in the pulpit, it's in the proof." Her voice cracked when she asked, "Will he forgive me for betraying my father?" I shook my head. "You didn't betray him. You freed him to meet the truth he's been praying to avoid." Outside, the church bells rang for evening service. Inside, the sound of her breathing steadied, as if some part of her had been reborn. Eden stood, wiped her eyes, and whispered, "Then let the truth speak louder than his sermons." And in that moment, I knew my granddaughter had become the Cain her father had tried to erase. Sunday morning in Oklahoma has a smell, coffee, dust, and the faint sweetness of cheap cologne. Greg always said it was the scent of God's people. That morning, it smelled like judgment. The pews were full. Families in pressed clothes, children fidgeting with hymn books, old women whispering gossip disguised as prayer. Greg stood at the pulpit in his tailored gray suit, voice booming through the speakers and out into the live stream that reached half the county. Behind him hung a banner, the Eddy Foundation Restoring Hope to the Lost. I sat in the back pew, hands folded, eyes fixed on him. The irony could have choked a saint. My son's name, the same name he buried, now printed on glossy flyers for a charity that funneled his stolen insurance money. The crowd clapped when Greg raised his arms, quoting scripture about redemption and mercy. "Our town," he said, "has been blessed by second chances. The Lord forgives all who turn from sin, who embrace the light of truth. And today we ask you to give generously to those still struggling in darkness." My heart beat steady. The front door creaked open. The sound was small, but it split the air like thunder. Every head turned. A man stood in the doorway, framed by sunlight, thin, gray-haired, leaning on a cane. His face was tired but unmistakable. The church went silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Eddy stepped forward. Greg froze mid-sentence. His hand, the same one that had signed Eddy's death certificate, gripped the pulpit. His lips parted, but no words came. Eddy's voice carried through the church, calm and raw. "You want to talk about salvation, Pastor?" he said. "Let's start with confession." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Some people whispered, some crossed themselves. One old man dropped his Bible. Greg's face drained of color. He stammered, "You're dead." Eddy took another step. "No," he said evenly. "Just buried by your prayers." I rose from the back pew, my cane tapping against the tile. Eden stood beside me, pale but resolute. We walked together down the aisle. Every step echoed. When I reached the front, I placed the thick FBI file on the altar, right beneath the crucifix. "You preached forgiveness, Greg," I said. "Let's see if you can practice it now." Greg laughed, a high, cracked sound. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "These people trust me. They need me." Eden stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. They needed the truth more. She held up a single sheet of paper, the insurance claim from 1989. "You stole a dead man's name to build your empire. And when he refused to die, you tried to finish the job." A murmur spread through the crowd. The live stream camera, still rolling, captured everything. Dozens of phones were up, recording. Greg's mask of holiness started to crumble. Sweat streaked down his temples. "Lies," he barked. "All of it. This woman is old, senile. My daughter's confused. This man is an imposter." Eddy stepped closer, his cane clacking on the tile. "Then prove it." He pulled the silver cross from his neck and held it up to the camera. "This is the cross my mother fixed with fishing wire when I was 10. You can check the scar on my wrist where you handcuffed me to the truck. You can ask the FBI who cleared my name. Or better yet," he turned to the congregation, "you can ask your God if this is what righteousness looks like." Greg lunged forward, grabbing at the documents. "You won't destroy me again," he shouted. The papers spilled across the altar like snow. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, the man who stole everything I loved, and said quietly, "You did that yourself." Behind him, 2 uniformed officers entered the church. The congregation turned in unison. The lead officer stepped up to the front and read aloud, voice firm, "Gregory Miles, you are under arrest for insurance fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent." The moment hung in the air like thunder before it breaks. Greg froze, then snarled, eyes wild, "You'll burn in hell for this." I met his gaze and answered, calm as prayer, "Then, we'll see you there." The cuffs clicked around his wrists. The crowd erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in a wave of gasps, whispers, disbelief. Greg struggled as the officers led him down the aisle, his voice breaking through the noise. "You think this means anything? You think God's on your side?" Eddy's reply was soft but clear. "God stopped listening to you the night you killed an innocent man." The officers pulled Greg outside. The sunlight hit his face as the church doors swung open. Phones caught every second the fall of a man who'd spent decades preaching purity while rotting inside. By that afternoon, the footage was everywhere. Pastor Gregory Miles arrested mid-sermon trended on every platform. Clips of Eddie standing in front of the altar spread like wildfire, his words subtitled, his cross gleaming under the stained glass light. Inside, people sat stunned. Some prayed, some wept, and for the first time in 35 years, I felt the air in that church clear. No more false sermons, no more lies wrapped in scripture. Just truth, loud enough to echo. Eden leaned toward me, whispering through her tears, "It's over." I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "It's only just begun. Justice doesn't end when the guilty fall. It begins when the innocent can stand again." Eddie put his arm around me, and for a moment, the world went still. Outside, the sirens faded into the distance, and the congregation rose slowly, uncertainly, but together. Some started clapping, others joined in. A few even smiled through tears. And as I looked up at the cross above the altar, I thought, for the first time in decades, this house finally belonged to God again. After Greg's arrest, the world grew strangely quiet. For years, his voice had filled the air on radios, on live streams, in every Sunday sermon that made people feel guilty enough to give. Now there was only silence. The church closed for restructuring. The banners for the Eddie Foundation disappeared overnight, as if repainting a lie could erase its shadow. The news said Henry Miles had died alone 2 days after the arrest. Heart failure, they called it. Maybe it was that. Or maybe it was the weight of his own sins finally finding their way home. The papers barely mentioned him. No memorial, no congregation weeping at his grave. Just a short obituary in the back pages, survived by his son, currently under federal investigation. Eden came to see me a week later. I was sitting on the porch, shelling peas into an old bowl the way I used to when life still felt ordinary. She stood at the gate for a long time before she spoke. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," she said. I looked up. The Oklahoma sun hit her face just right, and for a second she looked like my daughter had at her age, hopeful, scared, and too proud to show either. "You can come in," I said. She walked slowly up the steps, her shoulders rounded like someone carrying a lifetime of words she didn't know how to say. "I called you names," she said finally, her voice small. "I said things I can't take back." I nodded, not to dismiss her, but to accept the truth. "Then build something that speaks louder than them." She blinked. "You're not angry?" "Anger's easy," I said. "Faith isn't." She sat beside me, and for a while we just listened to the sound of cicadas humming in the fields. Then she said quietly, "I quit my job. I couldn't go back there after what happened. Every chart I touched, every file, it felt like another secret waiting to rot." I reached over and took her hand. Sometimes quitting isn't running away. Sometimes it's making space for something better. She smiled faintly. "Eddie's been talking about starting a center for people who got caught in the same system that swallowed him. Said he wants to call it the Grace Project." "That's a good name," I said. "Grace is the only thing that can stand after justice has done its work." Eddie's recovery was slow. The years had taken more from him than just time. His lungs were weak, his hands trembled when the pain came, but his mind burned bright. The day he came home from the hospital, he looked at me and said, "They called us sinners, Ma. Maybe it's time we show them what faith really means." So that's what we did. We started small, one room at the edge of town, in a building that used to be a feed store. Eddie used his compensation settlement to buy it outright. Eden handled the paperwork, the licensing, the logistics. I kept the books and made the coffee. We called it the Grace Project Center for Justice and Renewal. The sign out front was hand-painted by a local kid who dropped out of high school and came to us for help getting his GED. At first, people stayed away. Old habits die slow in small towns, and nobody wanted to be seen near the family that had shamed the pulpit. But when the first ex-convict came home with nowhere to go, it was Eddie who met him at the door, shook his hand, and said, "You're safe here." Word spread. 1 man became 3, 3 became 12. Within a year, we had a waiting list. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped to donate food or volunteer. Even the new pastor from street. Augustine's came one afternoon, hat in hand, and said, "Mrs. Kane, I'd like to partner with your center. We want to help." I didn't trust him at first, but Eddie did. "Maybe faith deserves another chance," he said. The nights were hardest. When the air went still and the shadows grew long, I'd sit by Eddie's bed, watching him sleep. He still woke sometimes with the same old tremors, the same flashbacks. I'd hold his hand until his breathing slowed. "You're home," I'd whisper. "No one's taking you again." One evening, Eden came in carrying folders and coffee. "The FBI says they've reopened the case," she said softly. "There's talk of charging the old sheriff posthumously. They want your testimony, Ma." I smiled faintly. After 35 years, they finally decided to listen to an old woman. She squeezed my shoulder. An old woman who turned her pain into proof. Outside, the crickets sang. Inside, Eddie stirred and opened his eyes. "Talking about me again?" he teased weakly. "Always," I said. He smiled, tired but genuine. "Then make sure they know the truth, Ma. I'm not a victim, I'm a witness." That night, I stood by the window, looking out over the dark fields where my life had once burned down. There was still ash in the soil, but new things were growing there, too slow, stubborn, alive. People asked later how we forgave. I never said we did. Forgiveness isn't something you give to them, it's something you give yourself, when you finally step out of the fire. Greg's trial was still months away. Eden would have to testify. Eddie might too, if his health allowed it. But for now, we had peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from building something that won't fall apart again. Before I went to bed, I walked to the small cross that hung by our front door, the same one Eddie had kept through all those years. I touched it and whispered, "You see, Lord, we didn't burn, we rebuilt." A year passed, and the wind across the Oklahoma plains felt different, warmer, cleaner, like the land itself had exhaled after a long silence. The old Kane Ranch, once sold, burned, stolen, and cursed, had been rebuilt from its bones. The barn was gone, the house replaced by a modest 2-story building with pale white siding and a new wooden sign swinging gently from a post at the gate. It read, "Eddie's Haven, a place for the lost to come home." The first time I saw it finished, I cried not loud tears, just the kind that slip out quietly when you realize pain has finally turned into something worth keeping. Inside, the walls smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee. The rooms were bright, open, filled with laughter that didn't sound forced. Eden managed the place now. She kept her father's sharpness, but it had softened into something gentler. People listened when she spoke, not because she demanded it, but because she'd earned it. Eddie oversaw the rehabilitation program. His voice was rougher these days, his gait slower, but when he talked to the men and women who came through the doors, people just out of prison, addicts, the forgotten, his eyes carried the same fierce light I'd seen when he was 10 and swore he'd fix the broken fence himself. He never spoke about his years locked away unless someone asked, and even then he only said, "They tried to bury me, but God had other plans." As for me, I sat in the corner office most days, pretending to keep ledgers, but mostly just watching. I liked the way sunlight fell across the old magnolia tree Eddie had planted near the entrance. It stood where the family barn used to be, its roots drinking from soil that had once held ashes. When it bloomed, it smelled like peace. One morning, a reporter from the Oklahoma Gazette came by. She was young, polite, and earnest in that way only reporters with their first big story can be. She took notes, asked questions, took photos of the volunteers painting a new mural on the wall, a wide-open field with hands reaching toward the sky. When she finished, she shook my hand and said, "Mrs. Kane, you've turned tragedy into grace. What do you want people to know most about this place?" I thought about it, then answered, "That redemption doesn't belong to those who hide behind pulpits. It belongs to those who dare to keep the light on for someone who's lost." Her article came out a week later under the headline, "From Shame to Shelter." The woman who turned her son's mockery into hope. It went viral faster than I'd expected. Donations poured in from all over the state, farmers, teachers, even an old church member who once refused to sit near me sent a letter with a check and a single line, "You were right, Mrs. Kane." God does his best work in silence. The biggest shock came from Eden. One evening, she came into my office holding a small velvet pouch. She set it on the desk without a word. When I opened it, a gold wedding ring rolled out, the one Greg had given her mother 40 years ago. "I sold my car," she said quietly. "But it wasn't enough for the new dorm wing. I thought about selling the ring months ago, but couldn't bring myself to. Then I realized, maybe it's better if that gold finally does something good." I looked at her, at the daughter of a man who once destroyed everything sacred, now giving away the last thing he'd ever touched. "That's how redemption starts," I said, "when we stop keeping pieces of the past that never loved us back." The new wing opened in spring, named the Magnolia Hall. On dedication day, the sky was blue without a single cloud. Reporters came again, but this time it wasn't about scandal, it was about second chances. Eddie spoke softly to the crowd, his hand on the tree he'd planted. "My mother once told me God's justice ripens slow," he said. "I didn't understand it then. I do now. You can't rush forgiveness or truth. They grow like roots, quiet, deep, unstoppable." Eden stood beside him, her hand resting on the shoulder of a little boy named Jonah, one of the children from our outreach program. His parents had both overdosed, but he smiled like someone who hadn't learned sorrow yet. When Eddie finished speaking, Jonah picked up the watering can and poured it gently at the base of the magnolia. "For new things," he said. The crowd clapped, and even I, who thought I'd cried all the tears a person could, found myself wiping my eyes again. Later that evening, when everyone had gone, I stood by that same tree. The sun was low, painting everything gold. Eddie and Eden were talking to a small group near the porch, one woman from a shelter, a man who'd just gotten his first job after release. Their voices carried across the yard, full of life. I thought of how far we'd come. The town that once spat on our name now sent casseroles and prayers. The church that had turned its back now sponsored weekly counseling sessions at our center. Even the sheriff's office partnered with us to support ex-inmates. Justice hadn't just punished, it had transformed. That night, I wrote a letter to the editor of the Gazette. I wasn't sure if they'd print it, but it felt right to write anyway. They said I was a fool for loving too long. Turns out love just needed time to prove itself right. I once believed justice was a hammer. Now I know it's a harvest. What you plant in pain will grow if you wait long enough. When I sealed the envelope, I felt something in my chest ease, the last knot of bitterness finally loosening. At dusk, Eddie walked over, leaning on his cane. "You know, Ma," he said, "you could have given up. Nobody would have blamed you." I smiled. "Oh, but then you wouldn't have had anywhere to plant that tree." He chuckled softly. "Guess we both got stubborn from the same place." Eden joined us, holding Jonah's hand. "He says he wants to be a counselor when he grows up," she said proudly. "Good," I replied. "The world could use more people who know how to listen." The three of us stood there until the last light faded and the first stars came out. Somewhere far away, a church bell rang, slow and steady. I looked at the magnolia again, its blossoms glowing faintly in the dark. "They mocked my son," I said softly. "They mocked me. But God's justice ripens slow, and oh, it's sweet when it's ready." And that was the truth. The land that once buried lies now bloomed with purpose. The names that had once meant shame now meant refuge. The house that was once a grave was now a home. And if this story found a heartbeat in you, remember, every truth deserves a witness. So, my dear listener, if you believe that truth never stays buried forever, hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because dignity never dies. This is Grandma, and that was my story.